Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Allison Elsner, and I'm the CEO at the San Bernardino County Medical Society and Inland Wellness Information Network. We welcome you this Friday to our third session in the Food, Health, and Cultura series. I'm very excited today to introduce our program director, Dr. Angie Romero Neeson. She is a quadruple board certified physician who's passionate about advancing health equity by amplifying the expert voices in medicine where health, nutrition, culture, and lifestyle medicine intersect and advance chronic disease management in a culturally adaptable manner. Dr. Neeson, we will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I think it gives us access to the CME. There you go. Those are our objectives. There are a few, but many that we have today. I want to go to the next slide. I want to introduce my speakers today because they're amazing Latino colleagues here with me today. They are part of the minority of health professionals who are into food, nutrition, and a part of the medicine culture. So Dr. Antonio Miranda is not only a registered dietitian, he's also a diabetes educator. And as we know, world expert in Latino health behaviors, specifically on machismo studies. He is a national speaker and consultant and works with many health experts while residing in the greater Dallas area. I introduced him in the first round. He is 1%. He is in the 1% of Latino PhD holders, and educators. Dr. Robert Graham, also known as Dr. Rob the Chef, is the only Latino physician I know. I don't know of any others. He wears many hats, including being a chef, a chief health officer, and a co-founder of Fresh Medicine. He is the director of integrative medicine at his hospital, at Catholic Health, where he sits at the intersection of integrative medicine, food, and public health. And when I just want to make sure when I say Latino, we are including Latinos, Latinas, Latine. This is a global term from global American countries. We are not the same, even though we may appear the same to a lot of other people, that we're not the same. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows, even despite being from areas of Mexico, we are all different because there's a lot of subcultures and a vast cultural diversity between us. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And just a bit about my story. You know, when we talk about immigration, it's important to make sure that the narrative is really a lived experience. So my narrative is such that over 100 years ago, my grandmother, great-grandmother, and great-grandfather came to this country as braceros and wanted to work hard and make a living and have their family. Unfortunately, at that time in medicine, we know that communicable diseases were on the rise. I doubt she died of acute heart failure, but it could have been probably something related to an infectious disease. Nonetheless, she had her two girls, and that was my grandmother. And so my grandmother she was 9 months old when my great-grandmother died. So she grew up without a mother. And despite that, she had 10 children of her own, 7 who made it alive. One of them, who is my mother, the only daughter of the family. And so she was the queen, would you say, of the family, because she was the only daughter. When my grandfather, down in the right or the left lower picture, when my grandfather was diagnosed with diabetes in Chicago after they immigrated back to Chicago, she was the only one who was bilingual and can understand what a registered dietitian and the doctors were saying. And so she translated everything. And she was also the cook of the family. And when she did this, she did it out of love. She did it because it was the only thing she could do to help her family succeed. And so by doing this, I now have the language of Spanish, English, and food as medicine. So in that top right picture, that's my parents. We are celebrating National Latino Day, which, by the way, thanks to my amazing Latino colleagues, is now a national holiday. It is October 1st. Please get involved. There are 6% of us Latino physicians, 2.4% Latina physicians in the US. There's not enough. And so this discordance is what we're trying to achieve the disparities of for our patients. So when patients ask me, or when people ask me, why do you believe in food as medicine? And I say, because I lived it, because I am proof that we can break these generational cycles of chronic conditions. Through what my mom did, through the cooking that she did, now this bottom picture, we just got together, this is a family reunion. All of us are having that food, cultura, and health awareness to be able to be successful and remain healthy. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but the first session we talked about the Latino life expectancy and how it is 3.1 years on average greater than non-Hispanic whites. And if we look at different states where it's most populated, we can see that that is a trend except for New Mexico. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And when we talk about age-adjusted death rates, the top two common causes of chronic disease, number one top is heart disease, and number two is cancer. And when we look at Latinos, we have a 30% lower rate of heart disease and cancer than non-Hispanic whites, despite not having access to healthcare, despite not having the literacy that's required to navigate this country and health systems. And go ahead and go to the next slide. And again, I talked about the Latino GDP. So everyone needs to know this is the fastest growing GDP behind China and India. So and I often wonder, go ahead and go to the next slide. With our multi-racial or our multi-generational households, we know we have like grandma living with the family and the kids. We're just growing. Our population is growing. We are now 65 million, and we're projected to grow about 1 million Latino births yearly in the United States. Go ahead and go to the next one. And so my question, after looking at all of this research and knowing about health and wellness and our food and our cultura, I have a food for thought that if we invested correctly in the Latino communities and we invested correctly in investing in our health, in the resources that we need to increase the disparities, the health disparities with communicable diseases and chronic diseases, could Latinos make the US a blue zone? And I think that we can. But let's go ahead and launch a poll, because maybe you don't know what a blue zone is, and I would like to have Dr. Rob go through this. So let's start with who knows what a blue zone is. I think thanks to Netflix, it made it a little bit more mainstream. Couple of you. Okay, we're at about, we'll wait one more second. Okay. More than half of you do not know what this is. Okay, so great. Welcome to this visit. You are about to walk into the doctor's office, and I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Rob. Go ahead and go to the next slide.
Audio here. Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Angie, for that introduction. I'll take it from here. So what's really interesting about the blue zones is that for about, say, 25 years, Dan Buettner's work has sort of percolated in our subculture. But as Angie mentioned, recently the Netflix movie sort of came and highlighted what they do. So it's really cool to call blue zones, because when he was going around the world and trying to identify as a demographer places and people that live the longest, he circled these 5 places with a blue pen. And if he had a red pen, it would be called the red zones, but he had a blue pen at that time, and thus it was called the blue zones. These are 5 places in the world with the most centenarians. They not only live long, but they live long in good health. And they have low rates of chronic diseases, things that are killing us today: diabetes, coronary artery disease, cancer, and obesity. And the average US age is 78.2 versus 10 years of Lexus. They extend their life roughly by 10 to 12 years in these blue zone countries. Next slide. And so why is this important, right? Because we're all trying to find the fountain of youth. And I like this slide here because it's a simple description of what we're trying to achieve, right? At birth, right, our health status, God willing, is at 100%. Throughout our projected lifespan, all it does throughout our lives drops, right? And ideally, some of the longest people that have lived, both in the blue zones and out of the blue zones, it's about 120 years. So we should be living, again, a very healthy life right till the end. But as you know, what's happening in the US and around the world is that we are living longer as a population in general, but not in good health. And so the idea is to live long and healthy. And I think blue zones have the answer. Next slide. And so I just like to reframe this into to identify that health is not the absence of disease, right? Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of the disease, infirmity. So this is a beautiful sort of definition by the WHO in 1946, and it was put into force in 1948. And I love the fact that very few things withstand the test of time. But this definition of what true health is has not been amended since 1948. And as you know, the WHO represents the world, not just the US. Next slide. And so for me, this becomes every single day, this becomes much more personal, right? And so if you guys have been part of the series here, you have seen these two beautiful people. These are my parents. And really at the age of 65, my parents sort of came to me and said, listen, you're a doctor, and so you must know how to maintain our health. And unfortunately, what we learn in medical school is how to manage diseases, right? And really the whole part of prevention is rarely taught in medicine. And so where do I get my knowledge and what I do, or my ikigai, I'll bring that up later, is really through these two amazing people. My father is a farmer from Washington State. He is a WASP, hence the name Graham. My mother is from El Salvador and locally known as La Curandera. So as a kid growing up, my mom had this red long picnic table, and all the mothers in our neighborhood in Jackson Heights, and not just Latinas, it was Indians, people from India, people from Italy, first generation from Germany, from Uruguay. Some African-American families would come and bring their children to my mother for la cura, right? So my mom would do these sort of cocktails, these concoctions, based upon spirituality and prayer, but also through gentle massage. Some people call it guided imagery or therapeutic touch. But my mom would put these kids on this red table that I would never forget and would just do her thing. And we would just watch in awe as sort of two boys just watching my mom do her thing. By the way, I forgot to mention my father, right? He retired, but he was a biochemist. So I grew up in this dichotomous model of, say, the old-fashioned healing principles of Latin America, particularly Salvadorian, and then sort of the biochemical reductionist approach of a biochemist. And so my story really is a synthesis of who I am, my roots. And if you guys have a chance, take a look at my TED Talk in 2015. It's called Back to My Roots. And it's really an homage to these amazing people and how they've crafted this wacky guy that started this movement called culinary medicine, integrative medicine, and really tried to reintroduce wellness and prevention into our pillars of modern day healthcare, which unfortunately is still slowly adapting to that space. So next slide. And so when I graduated from my fellowship, I was one of the first fellows to study this evolving field called integrative medicine. This was back in 2003. Coincidentally, Dan Buettner wrote this sort of landmark National Geographic article, The Secrets to Longer Living. And in 2003, as I became this very sort of young fellow, this was published. This literally changed how I thought about it, because we're all looking for that fountain of youth. Now, in the next couple of slides, I'll talk to you a little bit more about what makes us age and what keeps us alive. Next slide. And so just sort of diving a little deeper here. Again, these are the blue zones. We're going to call them out: Loma Linda, California, Nicoya Island, Costa Rica, Sardinia, Italy, Ikeda, Greece, and Okinawa, Japan. And so what's interesting about them is that what they have in common is that people reach the age of 100 at rates 10 times greater than us in the US. And again, long and healthy lives. Now, obviously, you can see that it spans the world. Interestingly enough, it's somewhat equatorial, right? So not really too north, not too south, right? They're all surrounded by water, but that's where sort of the commonalities stop. Obviously, there's different cultures, there's different languages, there's different ways of life. I just want to pull out to two of them, particularly Italy and Greece. Obviously, those are the sort of the bedrock of the Mediterranean lifestyle. I don't call it the diet because anybody that lives in that sort of area, we often say that this is the Mediterranean diet, but really goes beyond the diet. And I think that's what the Blue Zone sort of alluded to. Yes, food is important, but the lifestyle that surrounds our food is also important, including our cultures. Next slide. So the question to all of you, I'm not polling this because I imagine everybody would like to live to 108 healthfully. Next slide. Okay, so this is a little bit of science, okay? And this is sort of evolving research, but really important to understand. So these things are called telomeres. There are on all of our chromosomes. And I want you to think of these telomeres, right, as sort of the end cap of our shoelaces. Okay, you know that thing on our shoelaces that is plastically? That's a telomere. Now, the length of our telomeres determines our ages. Okay, and as you can see, as we get older, okay, this is the fact, as we get older, our telomeres will shrink. It's the rapidity of that shrinking that determines our aging. Okay, so we're all gonna get old and we're all gonna die. And that's the bad news. Now, let me share with you some good news. Next slide. Oh, sorry for this sort of layout here. So again, our telomeres are these end caps, but there's an enzyme that determines that shortening. Those are called telomerases. Now, what's interesting about this is that, again, as I said, as we get older, our cells rapidly divide. The more division, the shorter they are. But now what's happening in the last, say 20 years, we have found that as we get older, the reasons the cellular division makes us more susceptible to genetic changes. Those genetic changes may be good, and unfortunately, given our lifestyles here in the US, are oftentimes not healthy. And with sustained and progressive replication of our DNA, the more susceptible we are to diseases as we get older. So one of the greatest risk factors for death is our age, but we can modify how we age. Next slide. So the question really is, right, if science found a way to increase our telomerase production, telomeres would remain long, thus for lengthening our lifespan. Okay, so it's not about age span, it's about lifespan. It's about how long we live healthfully, thus reducing some risk of diseases. Next slide. So as you can see where we're going with this, right? Back to the fountain of youth. So Dan and his team found nine common things that these communities had in common. So it's called the power of 9. And I'll dive deeper in the next couple of slides, going all over each of these things here. Next slide. So move naturally. And this is sort of the science out of many of these communities. There's no gyms, right? There's no weightlifting. There's no treadmills, I call them, and no swear masters, right? This is about living and moving naturally. Next slide. Patients always tell me, well, how much? And I often say to them, just move. Some is better than none, and more is better than some, okay? Science basically says that 30 minutes of moderate activity a day is what is deemed recommended by doctors. I often start my patients like this. You need to crawl before you can walk, and you need to walk before you can run. So if you're not moving, just move. Oftentimes patients tell me, I don't have time. Walk in 15 minutes in one direction, turn around and walk back. That's your 30 minutes. So I'm not telling anyone to start running. I'm not telling anyone to start doing yoga. I just want people to start moving naturally in their natural environment. Next slide. Find a purpose. This is one of my favorite things. This comes out of the Okinawans in Japan. Okinawans believe in this concept called ikigai. And I challenge all of you to identify your ikigai. Many patients, many people believe that ikigai is their kids or their family or their work. It's really more than that. Why do we get up in the morning? And I'll tell you something about me. I thought my ikigai was to become a doctor and help people, right? But unfortunately, the way we practice medicine, right? Particularly early in my training, I realized that we rarely sort of help people find wellness, right? We also, again, manage our diseases. My ikigai really wasn't until about 15 years ago when I started taking doctors cooking and realizing that my ikigai, my reason why I do this, right, is that I really want to connect the dots between our healthcare system and our food systems. And that's why I love what I do now with this particular cohort, because it's taking care of my people. So again, find your reason why you're here. And it's not your kids, it's not your spouse, it's not your partner. It's something that you are meant to do in your lifetime. Now, what's really hard about this is that very few people will ever find it. And once you do, to stick with it and make it your life passion. Next slide. Other one, downshift. We can't all be running at 4 to 5 speed, okay? Sometimes we just need to cool off our engines and downshift. Pull over to the side, take some time to rest and digest. Without this, we're continuously going. A book I really love that I recommend to my patients is The Monk Who Sold His Red Ferrari. If you haven't read it, read it. A Ferrari needs to be driven fast and long, but if you do that every single day, you will find yourself on the side of the road without gas. So sometimes you just need to pull over and get some gas. Next slide. One of my favorites, again, this comes out of the Okinawans, traditional of family first, but also I think from Costa Rica, Italy, and Greece. This is one of these things that go throughout all societies. Family first, la familia. Next slide. Other important thing, this is not about religion. This is not about spirituality. It's belonging to something, some faith that you believe that something is greater than you. It doesn't have to be tied to a religion. It just has to be a belief and a belonging to that sort of concept that you are part of a greater thing. Next slide. Equally important, not necessarily a family, but your tribe, right? My company called it Fresh Medicine, right? It's an acronym for food, relaxation, exercise, sleep, and happiness. But I like to call it, I'm a New Yorker, born and raised. I'm a big fan of hip hop. So I called my tribe a tribe called Fresh. And so these are people that really want to develop this sort of fresh mindset, fresh lifestyle. It is about the people that we surround ourselves. And as you know, or if you don't know, I'll share with you an interesting fact. Nicholas Christakis wrote a paper roughly about 10 years ago, is that health is contagious. And so that's where you must surround yourself with the tribe of people that support you in your goals in life. Otherwise, they're just going to rob your energy. And so if you have any of these people in your family or in your professional life, those are the people that you try to sort of separate yourself with, because all they're going to do is bring you down. Surround yourself with people that support you and you will live longer. Remember, these are all these 9 principles of longevity. Next slide. So this is my mom's quote. So now I go to my mom and I ask her, what do you think about all this? And she said, food, not diet, okay? Food is the key to longevity, but also sex, naps, wine, and good friends. Next slide. The sex thing was kind of throwing me off a little bit when I'm speaking to my mom about this, but you know, without her, I wouldn't be here. Anyway, let's go back to the food. So the food, I just want to highlight a couple of the commonalities and differences of all of the places I mentioned before, the 5 blue zones. So the Okinawan, again, from Japan, a lot of vegetables, rice and fish, rich in protein, but low in calories. People from Costa Rica, they eat early and minimally, okay? They believe that your largest meal should be in the morning, and then your lightest should be at night. Their diet includes beans, yams, and small portions of meat. Icara, Greece, and Sardinia, again, the Mediterranean. They believe in the Mediterranean diet, rich in fish, vegetables, whole grains with moderate amount of alcohol. I'm going to dive into these a little bit deeper in the next couple of slides. And Loma Linda, California, really removes themselves from the entire US population. They traditionally have a low-fat vegan diet, avoiding a meat and dairy products as much as possible. Next slide. So I just want to start off by this. So this is obviously part of the Mediterranean lifestyle, drinking a glass of red wine, okay, not alone, but with others, okay, at 5. Next slide. This is the perfect opportunity for me to remember to drink water, not calories, okay? There's been some recent research, right, that has shown that no amount of alcohol is healthy, right? That sort of goes against 50 years of science that says some moderate alcohol has been healthy. There's a J curve of alcohol too, is that's where you get to the sort of one glass of alcohol a day for a woman, 2 glasses of alcohol for a man. I just want everyone to remember, I've never recommended any sort of drinking wine for health, but keep it in moderation and if possibly at all to a minimum. Drink water, not your calories. Next slide. This is another one from the island of Okinawa. It's called Hari Hachibu. It's a great one to practice with your kids, Hari Hachibu. Our body knows, our stomach knows when it's 80% full. Unfortunately, what we do, and we all see, if tonight, it's Friday night, you're all going to go out and hang out with your friends and families, and we're all going to do this. We're about 80% done with our meals. We usually drink a little bit of water, a cocktail, or a wine, and then what we do as Americans, we go and finish it off. Oftentimes, that's when our mind and our brains and our guts are talking to each other. When it's almost about 80% full, that's when we should stop eating. Next slide. I'm going to a couple of dichos, because I know we all love those. So this is another thing I really like, eat off smaller plates. Throughout our lifetime, my lifetime, our plates have increased by about 35%. So growing up, our plates were about 8 to 10 inches. The average American plate now is anywhere between 12 to 16 inches. Now, we also realize that the more we put on a plate, the more we're going to eat. So eat off smaller plates. Next slide. And again, this whole adage is sort of stays true again. Eat the smallest meal of the day in a late afternoon or evening. Go back to the old-fashioned Costa Rican way of doing it. Large in the morning, smaller in the evening. Next slide. And now I have to throw in a couple of things that I believe, okay? You need to eat more plants. And next slide. Beans, okay? A cup of beans should be part of everyone's diet most days than not. Next slide. And so I just want to end with a little bit of a story here. So for about 2 years during the pandemic, I worked with the Blue Zones. It was a wonderful opportunity to sort of go around the country and identify places that wanted to become Blue Zones. And I completely agree with Angie. It doesn't have to be a physical location, although that is sort of the premise of the Blue Zone. But I think as a culture, we can actually own it by going back to our roots and reconnecting with our past, right? Because the future, if we see where we are today, is not going to be healthy for us Latinos. And so Dan and I sort of joke around about this a little bit. So he has the power of 9. I've synthesized mine to 5. And if I can, I'll end with this. When it comes to food, eat more plants. Find time, 10 minutes a day to relax, move for 30 minutes a day, sleep 7 to 8 hours a night. And when it comes to other happiness, it's based on positive psychology. Other people matter. And that's why I am here today, because all of you matter to me. And so with that, I'd like to close with one of my favorite quotes designed by myself and my wife. Next slide. When it comes to our health, it starts with food, but in the end, what we really want in life is to be happy. And I'm happy to pass it over to one of these amazing friends of mine.
All right, my turn, and I'm Antonio Miranda, or as some of my friends call me now, El Doctor Dichos, Dr. Dichos. My dissertation was actually in how we can utilize dichos to deliver health messages to our community. So, but before we get into that, I want to recap, Dr. Rob, that was amazing. And I just want to pause and say thanks to everybody who's really on the back end. For people who are watching on the recording or watching live now, we can learn a lot from all the things that Angie and Dr. Rob have just covered, but I think what's really difficult for all of us is to take our own Blue Zone advice, right? I know Dr. Neeson, Dr. Rob, myself, but Allison, everybody, you guys are awesome, and just wanted to give you all a shout out. And we're all a bit of workaholics, and this is a really good talk for us to share together. We've clearly found our Uchiban, but maybe need to work a little bit better on our sleep. So that was awesome. I just really appreciated that. So my goal here, of course, the premise The premise of today's talk is what can we learn from our ancestors? And one of the most fascinating things to me, growing up as a Mexican American, parents from Mexico, but when I first started here in the US, I was the only kid in the school that spoke Spanish. Now, if you don't speak Spanish in school as a white kid, then it's like, well, you don't speak Spanish, you know what I mean? So things have really changed over time. But through the years, what I found fascinating was the language, the dichos of my abuelos, of my papas, of people from Chihuahua, people or Chihuahua, as we say, people from Guanajuato, people from Cuba, all over Latin America. And though we speak a little bit different, the research shows there's a common universality, which is we all use dichos. A lot of times this stems from lower literacy. And I think one of the things that we're missing in healthcare is we know a lot of this positive information, but how can we use these ancestral dichos, which are literally the collective knowledge of our ancestors, right? And we can share some in a second, and how we can use those to have cultural humility to better serve our patients and even to help ourselves, to remind ourselves. Because even I, going through my PhD, after a while, I told myself, what was the dicho? No te ahogues en un vaso de agua. Your career is only this part of your life, but you're making it the whole part. You're drowning in your own brain. And that's a very powerful dicho, no hay que ahogarnos en un vaso de agua. So today I want to take barriga llena, corazón contento. So yeah, let's go ahead and start sharing. We're going to learn how to utilize dicho, go into dicho's research, but I start with the question, what's your favorite dicho? Type it in the chat here. And as you guys are typing, I'm gonna share some dichos with you, because what my research showed is that dichos are spontaneous. It's hard for me to say, hey, tell me your favorite dicho. Dichos arise organically as we're going back and forth. So some common ones: camarón que se duerme se lo lleva la corriente. Salió más caro el caldo que las albóndigas, when we make a mistake, right? A grandes males, grandes remedios, what we have in the chat. Barriga llena, corazón contento. Very true. Pero ¿qué pasa con una barriga bien llenota? Maybe not as happy, right? So dichos are funny because you can tweak with them like that, right? As you're going back and forth with your patients, respectfully, of course, it's almost like a verbal sparring session that should be enjoyable. It's not a fight, but it's a spar. It's an oral sparring session that's pretty fun if you learn to practice. Más vale solo que mal acompañado. So dichos are fascinating. Anybody else have one before I move on? Tell me who you are, and I'll tell you who you are. Yes, and in Spanish, the equivalent would be, dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. O al que a buen, what is it? Al que a buena sombra. Well, you guys know better. Why am I blanking? Al que a buena sombra se le arrima. Al que a buen árbol se le arrima, buena sombra le acobija. There we go. See, there are too many to know. Next slide, please. So bringing it back to a scientific and systematic manner, when we think about cultural centering, as researchers, as interventionists, there are certain components of cultura that we want to integrate, and you can study these individually, whether it's at the population level, whether it's at the intervention level, and even at the individual level. The components of culture that or the dimensions that we can adapt are lenguaje, right? We need more Spanish speakers. We need more Latinos in healthcare, because even just right now, I had a patient, that's why I was running late today. I had a patient from Mexico, 88 years old, and he was just mind blowing. He said, oh, al fin alguien que me habla mi lenguaje. So number one that we can do is really promote Spanish in all generations that are up and coming, and even in people who are not native Hispanics. I had a student the other day who her parents are fully Anglo, fully from here in the US, fully fluent in Spanish. And I said, that's amazing. That is incredible. And we can do the same as Latinos, where we can improve our English, improve our Spanish, improve our dicho. So the lenguaje is very important. Con buen hambre no hay mal pan. So yeah, y'all could throw them in there as we're going. A palabras necias, oídos sordos. Yeah. So when the wife or the husband is trying to tell the spouse, to watch out for their blood sugar and take their insulin before, not after their meal, they're not going to listen because a palabras necias oídos sordos. So language is a component that we can change. The person, right? Sometimes I'm not the best person to speak to the moms that have gestational diabetes. Sometimes a woman Hispanic is a little bit better, but vice versa. You never know what's going to work. And then moving on, the content. Do we understand the beliefs of the Cubanos, of the Mexicanos, of the people who are 80-year-olds plus, of the people who are, right? Because while we have dichos for people who are 40 to 60 and 80 and up, guess who also has dichos? The kids who say Riz and Cap, like that's their own form of weird little dichos. So in 200 years or in 100 years, someone will be getting their PhD in Riz and in Noca, and that's so weird to think about. So as you can tell, I have a very, I'm not the smartest, but I'm very creative in my little brain there. So it's really interesting stuff. Other areas of cultural centering is understanding the concepts, right? What are the common concepts that we have in our culturas? The coraje, el susto me dio la diabetes. All of those things are areas that we need to understand, because what we need to do is help our patients not view us as, ese ni sabe, ese, you know, I've fought that battle my whole life where they see me and they're like, this guy looks Italian, this guy looks American. And then I start telling them dichos, I'm like, there you go. Yo soy más mexicano que tú. Not really, right? But it makes them laugh. So we've got to be playful, make your job a little bit more enjoyable. The context is another area. How are we helping our populations overcome their social determinants of health? But then at the very end, what you notice here is that what I chose to study in my research was that an understudied area of cultural centering are the metaphors of a population. Why aren't we using cuentos? Why aren't we using dichos? Why aren't we using analogies more? And they're called lexical categories of expression to build that cultural bridge. And we'll get into that just right now. Next slide, please. Camarón que se duerme se lo lleva la corriente. Consejo no perdido, consejo mal oído. See, and that's what's fascinating about dichos is you never know. Like there are so many different, there's regionality, there's nationality, there's generationality to dichos. It's really cool stuff. So here's what we did. So every presentation, I've gone a little bit more in depth. We interviewed men from Mexico, learned that they use dichos organically in their lenguaje, ánimo, all these phrases. So you can look up, if you want to screenshot, this was our first publication, the perceptions towards diabetes and obesity of Hispanic men or Mexican men, which led to our second publication. And I've taken a couple figures from here. And this article is titled Dichos and Diabetes, Literary Devices Used by Mexican Origin Males. So we scoured through all of the 150-page transcript and pulled out the dichos that came out organically in discussion. And guess what the overarching themes were? Look right here, bottom right, table 1. Dichos of religiosity, dichos of familism, dichos of formation, dichos of individuality, all of the core components that you would expect. So we can look at the Spanish ones. Lo que Dios diga, si Dios quiere. Right, a very dismissive dicho. There's truth to it, but it's also used as a dismissive tactic. Cuando Dios quiera, ayúdate que yo te ayudaré, which is an embracing technique, where you're saying, where the patients were saying, or the respondents were saying, yes, solo Dios sabe, pero Dios también quiere que nos ayúdenos. Right, so they were giving, there are counter dichos, there are complementary dichos. We have a lot of publications that we're working on. The second area, familism, la familia es primero. Aquí no es restaurante, right? We all grew up, no me gusta la mayonesa, papá. No. ¿Cómo no te va a gustar? Con hambre nos gusta todo aquí. It's fascinating stuff. And dichos of formation, how we were formed and shaped growing up. Todo exceso es malo. Lo que no cuesta no se valora. Right? That's a very powerful one. Sometimes we wonder, like, why are these communities? Why is this individual? Well, cuando no te cuesta nada, no lo valoras. So te tiene que costar algo. Like your fitness, your health, it has to be a bit of a challenge for you to get the dopamine response. Otherwise, you're stuck. You're stuck at zero. And then cada cabeza es un mundo. There's so many dichos. And I think I have 200 pages of additional transcript, and we're going through all of those and pulling out all the dichos and defining them. And it's really cool stuff. Next Next slide, please. Yeah, so we're caught up to date. So here's how I challenge us to learn from our ancestors and take that collective knowledge that has been passed down and utilize it to pass it on to our patients, to our clients, to our kids, to our family members. And it's just fun. I always share with what's funny is that I'm known as the dicho guy when I give talks, but my level of dichos is this much compared to my parents who didn't go to school. My understanding of dichos is this much compared to someone from Mexico. So it's really a humbling experience to have the love to learn the language of a population. So how do dichos work? What can we listen for when you're in clinic and I hear something? Let's say, for example, solo Dios sabe. What this can stand for is identification of the patient's belief. So what the respondents told us was that God's will be done, or si Dios quiere, it indicates, okay, that's a potential bridge. I'm also a Christian. I'm also a spiritual person. And God, you now know that they clearly, if they're saying the word God, there's something there. But then additionally, you have to be careful because just because somebody says it doesn't mean it's true. Si Dios quiere can just be casual faith talk, right? It's just, it sale por naturaleza just because it's what people say. But again, people can use it as disease minimization, deflection of disease, to say, oh, pues, diabetes, no me platiquen de eso, solo Dios sabe cuándo me voy a morir. And it's very important to be able to understand this one phrase. You've got to use your social knowledge, your intellectual knowledge to understand what is this person actually telling me. And let's move on to the next slide because we could talk about that for a whole lecture. So yes, skipping through the next few slides, not yet, but dichos are very interesting because they're powerful tools because they're visual, right? It's camarón que se duerme se lo lleva la corriente. Instead of sitting there, so when I work with my patients, right, I could go through, right, as a certified diabetes care education specialist, I could go through renal, cardiovascular, neural, all of these potential consequences of uncontrolled diabetes, but they're not going to remember all of that, right? I could barely remember it when I was learning it in school. We had to write papers on it to remember it. Well, guess what a nice, concise summary is? Cuídese, camarón que se duerme se lo lleva la corriente. Ya sé, aquí estoy para apoyarlo. So you're not being disrespectful. You're simply saying, hey, if you don't take care of this, this is going to take you somewhere that you're not going to like, and I'm here to help you. So that way it's both direct but supportive. And that's what I do a lot of times in English and Spanish. It's, hey, you're doing all right, but I need you to do better. And I'm here to support you. So next slide, please. In Colombia, we say, lo que no nos cuesta, hagámoslo fiesta. Nice. Really good. If you want to click through this slide, you might have to click a couple times to not play the videos, but there are videos on YouTube where you can look up dichos. Vanity Fair has where dichos are everywhere. You have Southern slang. Those are technically English dichos that are in certain areas of the U.S. You have dichos like aguas ten cuidado. That dichos are fascinating. You can buy books online that teach you the origin of all those different phrases. Like aguas originated from back when people lived in mass groups in different cities or in different areas, and people would dump their bath water out of the roof. And it's like aguas, it's a warning to get out of the way. So all that stuff is fascinating. Next slide, please. So yes, what we ultimately came to was how can we potentially take these culturally familiar and very functional phrases and integrate them into healthcare. And we reviewed the literature and found that dichos have been used in educational interventions for Hispanic children. Dichos had been used and continue to be used and been studied in counseling and with therapy. Si se puede, all these different frases, and which ultimately brought us to the question, why not healthcare? We're all probably doing it naturally, but we could improve that skill. Next slide. So the brief overview of a study we did about 3 years ago now, and sorry, it's kind of small here, but if you want to take a screenshot, this is actually pretty fascinating, where on the left-hand side, you have 16 dichos that we wanted to study. where we viewed them as possible, as dichos that could be possibly integrated into a healthcare topic. So, echando a perder se aprende, con la salud no se juega, la buena comida, a grandes males, grandes remedios, el que siembra cosecha, right? All these dichos. And so we took 16 participants and we gave them this list of dichos one at a time y les preguntamos, oiga, este dicho, hombre prevenido vale por dos, ¿con cuál frase la podemos conectar posiblemente? Con healthy eating, con physical activity, con health motivation, social support. And what we found was a really interesting chart. Next slide, please. Where this is the ugliest chart in the world, but I use it to show how the data is just really fascinating to look at, where you notice here dichos 1 through 16 at the bottom. I don't have the actual dicho, but all of these are different dichos. And on the left-hand side, you have the percentage that dicho was grouped in a certain topic. So for example, on dicho number 3, it was la buena comida es la mejor medicina. All the participants said that should be connected to comida. But then there are dichos that had multiple possible topics, like for health motivation, like camarón que se duerme can use for healthy eating, for exercising, for health motivation, for social support. Next slide. So we started seeing that if you look at the bottom two graphs, some dichos are unidimensional, can only function for one potential topic. So very small, the green one, la buena comida es la mejor medicina. 100% applied it to healthy eating, but very minimally to the other topics. But then when you have no hay que ahogarse en un vaso de agua, that was for mental health. You can use that to help people take a step back from that grandiosity of our challenges. But what's super cool on the right hand, figure 11, where you see there are so many dichos that can function for multiple topics. You see, querer es poder is a multidimensional dicho. Con la salud no se juega. Mente sana en un cuerpo sano. Hombre prevenido vale por dos. Like, these are very functional phrases. Angie, what time do you need me to stop? 58? Is that okay? 3? Good? All right, just making sure. Next slide. And this is just a preview of, and again, ultimately, this was a labor of love by a team that I worked with, but the ultimate goal was to bring these dichos to light so that we can pay respect to the people that came before us, like Angie's family, Rob's family, and my family, and how we can pass this information on in a functional manner in healthcare. And this is a study that's under review right now, or it's pending revision, deciphering dichos for nutrition and health discussion, a qualitative study. And it was really cool. Like, these are a couple paragraphs that I pulled out. We can look at dicho 6, no hay que ahogarse en un vaso de agua. You have to be careful with that dicho because it can be disrespectful if not used in a positive light. But here you can see the dicho was recognized by all the participants. The meaning of the dicho was summarized as, quote, and this is from the respondents, sometimes you worry too much about the things that have solutions, so you're there as if you're drowning in a cup of water, drowning where you could get out. If you apply the dicho, changing your perspective can help you get out of that stress. So that's fascinating that from the people who would never have gotten a voice, people that didn't even go to middle school, that are from Mexico, we asked them, you're the expert, you tell me what that dicho means. And it's a very humbling experience. And if you practice with your family members, always practice with your family first, you can learn when to conectar these dichos in a respectful manner. I would never tell someone that's down in the dumps, no te ahogues en un vaso de agua. That's disrespectful. Pero if you have a workaholic, if you're having someone who's just overly obsessed about something, and you have a medical student that's like, no, you're doing all these things. It's like, hey, take a step back. You're not just a medical student. No te ahogues en un vaso de agua. Sal a descansar. Sate con tu familia. Take a break. You're amazing, but you're drowning yourself. Simple as that. Next slide. And yeah, this is ultimately, I'm working with the CDC and some organizations. We developed a curriculum that's a pre-diabetes prevention program that integrates dichos into every single topic. So bienvenidos al programa Querer es Poder, which was indicated by motivation. Querer es Poder was seen as 100% in the motivation category. La buena comida, we talked about that. What's one we haven't talked about? Hay que hacer la lucha. Todo cabe en un jarrito sabiéndolo acomodar, right? If we organize our lives, we can make things fit. We can make those, just like Dr. Rob said, 15 minutes out, 15 minutes back. Hay que acomodarnos, hay que organizarnos. We can be respectful about it. Next slide. You could skip next slide, please. Next. Just so we can finish here on time. One more, I think. Yeah, so let's use dichos as a Trojan horse almost, because it really is a good connection with our patients, or a good cultural connection. Next slide. One more, please. One more.
You can take your time. Take your time.
That's okay. The last ones are the most important. I wrote 300 pages on this, so I tried to condense it for us. So yeah, these are the dichos. There are some potential downfalls you have to be careful with, where you have to be careful where there are a lot of TikToks online where the youth of today, right? The teenagers, the young 20-year-olds, they always say that los papás de hispanos no creen en la depresión, no creen en la ansiedad, nomás te dicen ponte las pilas. So that would be an incorrect use of a dicho, right? Ponte las pilas can be used in a supportive manner, but if you use it to someone has depression, that's the horrible use of dichos. So again, I encourage you, practice with your family, ask your parents, ask your family members. You can learn so much from them, and your patients will thank you. It's one of the best gifts to be able to have that connection. Next slide. So the takeaway from our ancestral dichos that are collective knowledge, that just think about it. These dichos have existed for hundreds of years. There's some truth to all of them, and you can use them to highlight or hide different areas of a concept. So the advantages at the bottom is that the linguistic economy, you say more with less. You can concisely summarize a 10-minute talk with a dicho of si se puede, creo en ti. Cultural camaraderie, linguistic flexibility. You can speak science with simplicity is what I say. That's how I gave the example of the diabetes-related complications leading to potential issues. We can use a dicho to reframe that, and now we have data to support it. Next slide. And if a picture speaks 1,000 words, then a dicho speaks 1,000,000. Anytime I give a talk or a group presentation at local volunteer events, I always finish with this slide just kind of as a joke so that people can enjoy it. Camarón que se duerme se lo lleva la corriente. And I put my little picture there now that they know me. I say, no dejes que te lleve la corriente, no te duermas. And they really enjoy that. So the last thing I'll say is, let's change el dicho ya valió, así se puede. Sincerely, Dr. Dichos. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Neeson. Thank you.
Okay, I think everybody can see me now. I'm going to be in my kitchen. So I just want to reiterate, thank you, Dr. Miranda, and thank you, Dr. Rob, the chef. Basically what they've said, and I want us to summarize, is that, we've always had a plant-based diet. We've always had these tenets of the blue zones. And if we just tap into our ancestry and we tap into who we are and unlock that, I really do believe that we have that foundation and we can build on it, and can improve our health and can improve and become a blue zone. So today, as if any of you have been following, we do sessions, and at the end of the session, we do a little cooking demonstration. So today, what I have for you is what the foundation of the Latino American heritage is. And so I like to remind people that it really is based off of whole grains, which at least in my heritage, tortillas, corn tortillas, that's a whole grain, and pulses. So go to the next slide. What is a whole grain? So everybody talks about different whole grains, and everybody, forgets that corn is one. So it's not the enemy. It's the way that it's been processed and how we use corn these days, and how it's incredibly made in our food system with unhealthy. But if you can go back to the whole aspect of how corn was made, it's actually a very healthy food. And that's what gave us our animo. That's what gave our energy to our families to be resilient, to keep working. So honoring, to me, every time I make a tortilla or every time I am cooking it and I'm looking at the ingredients, I kind of thank whoever made it, right? It's just 3 ingredients. It's corn, salt, water, lime. That's it. It's just that simple. Next slide. And why do we say whole grains? And the reason why is I like to make sure that everybody knows what a whole grain is. So if we take a look at this 3-layer shell, the bran is the fiber. The inside has all the nutrients, which is the germ, all the protein, the vitamins. And then that fluffy in the middle is the endosperm. And that's what mainly processed foods, basically they strip away the whole grain and then they take that endosperm out, and that can live on the shelf life for a very long time. So it's ubiquitous, and you can make a lot of money because it sits on the shelf for a very long time. And that's a lot of calories and energy, but it's missing that whole entire process with the vitamins and then the fiber, which have many health benefits. Next slide. And so a couple of tips that I usually say to families is, go look for that stamp. That stamp kind of gives you a little bit. So if I send my kids off to an aisle to go find something, they have to make sure that it's got that little yellow stamp, or that the first word on the back of the package says whole. And if we can at least make that move, it's a simple shopping trip, and it saves us all on time. Next slide. And then pulses. So we know them as frijoles, lentejas. We know them as like the daily dose of our bread. That's our protein. So I think that as we move towards Western culture, we forget that in our ancestry, I ask all my patients, did your ancestors eat meat 3 times a day? And the answer is usually no. We used to use it as a celebratory protein, and we would enjoy it. And it was usually coming from someone we knew in the farms or whatever. And so what was our protein? And when we go back to our ancient times, it was this. It was lentejas, it was beans, it was things that we already ubiquitously see. And so integrating those into our daily life is actually advocating for our heritage and celebrating our heritage. One of my favorite things that my son, we took a cooking class and the chef asked him, what's your favorite protein? He was trying to get him to like mushrooms. And he was like, well, what's your favorite protein? And my son said, beans. And it kind of knocked everybody off, because everybody assumes that protein means meat, but really it can mean a sustainable protein like beans. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And so, by celebrating our heritage, we have to unlock the potential of what our ancestors gave us, which is things from the earth. These, we know, improve our health. They are nutrient powerhouses. They provide lots of protein, iron, fiber, antioxidants. They are seen in blue zones. They give us the strong, the calcium for the bones. They're also low in fat and calories. So when people tell me, oh, I don't eat carbs, so I don't eat beans, I'm like, really? We know that this is probably what our ancestors ate all along, and they were strong and they were not worried about carbs. This kept them satiated. So by making these little simple additions, like tortillas, or even getting them from a can or making them yourself, you can have your adequate amounts of protein, or combine it with meat and protein, and now you have both. Next slide. And this is just a variety. You guys can put in the chat which ones are your favorite. I can't decide which ones are my favorite. I definitely like frijoles, black beans, and pinto, and definitely white ones too. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about my lived experience. Okay, so this is the evolution of enchiladas. All right, so my abuelita used to make them deep fried, made the enchilada sauce herself, and she would always tell me, no ponle más queso, so put more cheese on it, and it was deep fried in oils that she didn't know which ones were healthier, which ones were not, right? And then maybe there was beans on the side, but maybe there was some salsa or something like that. But that was it. And then my mom, like I said, my mom was the pioneer in our family who really changed the conversation of how we do things. And so, still being Latina, she made it a little bit different. And so she made enchiladas herself, but she only lightly sauteed one side of the tortilla. She made sure that there was always vegetables or a salad at the middle of the table. That is what I remember in my childhood. I always remember having vegetables at the center of the table. And so we always had that, and that's what our enchiladas look like. My mom put a little bit of cheese, but she would also add other different things, and then we had that side of vegetables. The way I make enchilada, and some people would be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you make things differently. It's taking that heritage. But no, I still celebrate it. I am proud that I'm still Latina. I can make enchiladas with adding black beans to it and some sauteed spinach and some onions as a filling with some cheese, and then making my own sauce. It's so easy to make a sauce, or you can get it from the can as well, and then, level it up or doctor it up. And then do the same technique as my mom did and put a side of salad on that as well. And so to me, it's just an evolution of all the things that I've learned from science and medicine and what it's taught us, and trying to evolve that same dish that we know is part of our heritage. So I challenge everybody here today to make something that's part of your heritage, and how can you make it unique and authentic to yourself? Next slide. Okay, and today I'm going to be making some wild veggie tostadas. So you can go ahead and stop sharing. You guys can, hold on, snap a quick picture of that if you guys are interested. I'll also post it on my Instagram later. And then go ahead and stop the sharing. Okay, so one of the things that I do with most of my cooking demonstrations is I want to make sure that everybody knows that cooking with an induction burner, I know it's not as fancy as my stove back there, but this actually decreases indoor pollution. And so if we're taking a look at our telomeres, and we want to make sure that pollution, and we're trying to keep our telomere length as long as possible, we want to make sure that we reduce our indoor pollution as well. So I always recommend doing something like this. Another thing is using extra virgin olive oil. So there's a couple of oils that I recommend. I'm sure Dr. Rob would recommend as well. The most high in omega-3 would be your extra virgin olive oil, your avocado oil for the high heat, and then canola oil. Those are typically the ones that I recommend. All right, so I'm heating up my pan here, and first I'm just going to start off with the basics of any good Latino meal, right? It's our chopped onions. These are like the bacon of all the vegetables. They have so much flavor. And again, this is one serving of vegetables. So you add that in there, get that sauteed. Take whatever's in season. So if it's a little bit of poblano peppers, thinly slice them, put some bell peppers in there as well. I like different colors. And so I'm just going to slice those in there as well. If you wanted to, you can add, things like mushrooms. My kids are not here today, so I'm going to add the mushrooms because they're not a fan yet. And I always say yet because just an introduction for the next seminar, which is on teens and childhood and pregnancy. We need to use positive language with our kids, but they're not quite yet familiar or in love with mushrooms like that. And then I just went into my garden and I got some bok choy. So I've been growing just some greens. These are really easy to grow. Honestly, I'm not a gardener. But what I love about cruciferous, now this could have been kale, this could have been Swiss chard, this could have been arugula, this could have been anything. But what I love particularly about cruciferous vegetables like this is that they do have the science to having more anti-inflammatory benefits. So for people who are aging and want the added benefit of less knee pain, less pains and aches, add your cruciferous vegetables, your broccoli, your cauliflower, your arugula. And then I just chop them up, just roughly. I'm gonna saute this a little bit, let that get brown. And then again, biggest thing, garlic, anti-inflammatory, lots of potential here. So I don't like to burn my garlic. I want to make sure that it stays closer to its raw form. So I add it at the end. And again, you can add as much or as little garlic as Dr. Indo Sobel said at the last one. If it calls for 1 clove of garlic, always add 5 more because it's just delicious. I use this little garlic press, so when I get the kids in the kitchen, you know, they can take along in being with me, you know, and they can twist it around and they can stir the pan a little bit with me. That's what I remember of my abuelita, you know, being in the kitchen with her. Those were my memories. And so again, it's about introducing our heritage, but also not forgetting that we need to teach the next generation how to cook, how to preserve some of those ingredients. Okay, so as this is sauteing, I'm just going to add the greens. And then again, cruciferous repollo, so cabbage. I like adding different color, eating the rainbow. So I'm going to add that as well towards the end. And as I have that sauteed, I'm going to turn this off and then just let that sit. Okay, so let's say that took almost no time. Came back from a busy day of work. Now I'm going to work on my tostadas. So you can make your own tostadas by just, you know, putting these tortillas in the air fryer, or you can buy the tostadas. That's fine too. You can buy some refried beans, or you can make them yourself. And again, this is a can of black beans. You can doctor it up, put a little bit of extra, I don't know, chili flavor, something that has a little bit of what you would want, and then get the kids involved, you know, so give them the masher, have them mash it up with you. It's always kind of fun to get the kids involved. And then I'm going to spread this again. This is our protein. So we spread this on the tortilla, on the tostada. And, you know, when I talk to my patients and I say, you don't have to go completely plant-based, you can be plant-forward. So maybe this tostada has meat in it, and maybe this one is just vegetarian. You make the decision, but it's always more of a plant-forward approach. And if you're really anti-carbs and you're really trying to cut down on the tortillas, you can always use red cabbage leaves as your tacos or as your tostadas. So that's another technique I give my patients. This is a vegetable that lives, you know, on your pantry and your fridge for a really long time. Take advantage of this. I'm going to switch I did the very like Food Network, did it ahead of time. So, okay, so I've got the basis, got my tostada here. So I've got the black beans. I'm going to use the veggies. So you guys can kind of see, this is what the sauteed veggies look like. And I could also do it toddler style, right? So whatever the kids want to put on, they get to decide how much, which beans, how many veggies they want, which veggies they want on their tostada. That's giving them agency within a structure of giving them the basis, the foundation. They get to decide what they want to put on it, right? So if one doesn't like something, that's fine. I respect that, but we're all still going to have a good foundation of a meal. Okay, and then in terms of like, you know, adding the add-ons. So my kids know routinely I'll have these little tiny, just pull these out. Okay. So my kids know this is what I usually have at the table. So again, it's like toddler style. They get to decide, do they want to put in the toppings of cilantro? Do they want to put some green onions that I just got from the garden? Which, by the way, for those of you who don't know, green onions easily for life. Just put them in a planter. All you have to do is when you cut it, just plant this little guy back in, and you'll have green onions for the rest of your life. So don't go buy them. Definitely just have them, make them in the garden. And then, of course, aguacate. Avocado, healthy fat. So again, we want to make sure it has good fiber, healthy fat, and that's got the antioxidants as well. So you put that on top. And then don't forget, you don't have to make salsa from scratch. A lot of times when we order from restaurants, I keep these little guys. They're called flavor bombs. Don't throw them away. You know, in a pinch, they're an extra little vegetable, and you can just pour it right on top. And now you have a good foundation, a lot of fun, and a really beautiful tostada that's plant forward. All right, and that is all I have. So thank you everyone for jumping on, and I hope to see everybody on July the 12th.
Wow.
Yes, July the 12th. We have 3 more sessions. If you want to get the recordings, we will post those recordings for the first 2 sessions if you missed them. And I hope you're enjoying this series. Thank you and have a very good weekend.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was amazing. Thank you. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.